What's up, Dragonfly Swarm? Borderlands 4 has officially been out for like 3 weeks now, and it has garnered a lot of pretty positive reviews outside of the performance issues on launch. I say that with the tonality of a shocked bozo because in comparison, Borderlands 3 received a lot of very polarizing reviews around its launch, and it kind of left the entire Borderlands franchise's future a bit uncertain. So, is Borderlands 4 really actually good? Is it a step up from 3? Did it revive the franchise? And is it worth buying and trying? Well, let's get into all of that. I've been playing games in the Borderlands franchise since all the way back in 2009 with the very first Borderlands. Granted, that alone doesn't make me any more or less credible than anyone else when telling you about how good or bad the game is, but you know, I've been playing since 2009, and Borderlands 2 happened to be, I would argue, one of my most played games of all time. I sank a massive chunk of my teen years into it. I've always been an all-rounder fan of the franchise. I'm quite a nerd about the lore of Borderlands, but I'm also equally obsessed with the gameplay itself. And as a general intro to this video, it's worth saying there's quite a lot to say about both of these things in Borderlands 4, both story-wise and gameplay-wise. To start this all off, let's kind of get into a mostly spoiler-free discussion about the story of Borderlands 4. So going into the game, I was only given two impressions. Firstly, that the story was noticeably darker than previous Borderlands titles, and secondly, that it consistently took itself more seriously than previous Borderlands stories. And now, having played through the entire game and sinking 50 hours into my first character, I would say those impressions are decently accurate. I do think a lot of Borderlands' comedic charm is still apparent in the story of this fourth game. That is to say, I wouldn't say it's that much darker than other Borderlands main storylines, but unlike in Borderlands 3, they utilize that comedic charm at far more appropriate times and let the story breathe when it needs to be serious and dark. This alone kind of supports the whole dark and serious tone that people keep talking about, and I do think the more palatable balance of comedy in this story makes it feel more immersive almost. You're not constantly being ripped out of the game by real-life meme Easter eggs and constant fourth wall breaks that tire you out before you're even halfway through the story. Borderlands 4 definitely takes itself more seriously, and it does so in a way that lets you really sink into the story and feel like your chosen Vault Hunter is part of it. And speaking of which, one thing in particular that I believe really stands out about this story is the involvement of your Vault Hunter. In previous Borderlands titles, it was always noted that no matter which Vault Hunter you chose, it always felt like they weren't really part of the story. They were just your little character that ran around and did quests for important people, and outside of that, they were kind of invisible. It even got so bad in Borderlands 3 that people made entire memes about how Troy and Tyrene's whole gimmick was that they wanted to steal powers from sirens, and yet when you played as Amara, who is a fucking siren, Troy and Tyrene never once acknowledged you or gave a flying that you were constantly just there. It felt really shallow, and Amara's status as a siren was never even briefly alluded to within the story of Borderlands 3, despite its intense focus on sirens and their sheer power in the Borderlands universe. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think the same thing happened in Borderlands 2 with Maya, another Vault Hunter that you could play as, who also happened to be a siren in the middle of a story where sirens were pretty important. With that said, I'm really pleased to say that Borderlands 4 does, in my opinion, a hell of a job rectifying that massive mistake in its main story. I played through my first time as Vex, who happens to be a siren, and that trait wasn't ignored. In fact, there were several times throughout the story where important characters even actively engaged with my character about her traits. Even cooler than that, there are little bits and pieces throughout the story where your chosen Vault Hunter will banter a little bit with the NPCs, and they actually have unique interactions depending on the Vault Hunter you're playing. Little details like these went a very long way and sometimes shocked me because, like I said, I've been playing Borderlands games since 2009, and they've never had such interactive dialogue from your Vault Hunters. It made it a lot easier to immerse myself in the story and truly feel like the character I chose, Vex in this case, was an important part of the story. Zooming back out to the bigger picture a little bit though, in general, I would argue this is the most fleshed out story of any of the Borderlands games. It does a fantastic job of introducing us to this new planet Kairos, while still tying it in really well with the Borderlands characters and stories that we're already familiar with. I will say the big bad guy of this game, the Timekeeper, is perhaps unsurprisingly, not nearly as memorable of a villain as Handsome Jack. But to be fair, Handsome Jack is one of the most beloved villains in gaming history. It just kind of felt like the Timekeeper wasn't very involved in a lot of the main stories, so by the time you actually do encounter him for the first time, you're like, hey, what's up, hey? And I would argue this was a bit of a shortcoming with several key characters in the story, to be honest. I think if you were to ignore side quests and stick to the main story missions, there are a lot of really fascinating characters, both new and recurring, that kind kind of just get tossed into the story and then dance around for a little bit and then disappear into the background. I'm willing to chalk this up to it just being a massive and intentionally chaotic story though, because there are a lot of characters to meet, and obviously the writers can't spend forever making us get to know every single person in the main campaign. Personally, my two surprising favorites in this story were Zadra and Callus. I think both of these characters added a really interesting layer of moral complexity that Borderlands rarely experiments with in depth. Usually you'll have cut and dry good guys or bad guys, but Borderlands 4 introduced several main characters that have very distinctly conflicting morals that make them more complex than just this guy is bad or this guy is good. All of that said, the main story managed to keep me captivated for its entire 20-ish hour runtime, and there were lots of times where I was literally on the edge of my seat, freaking out, rooting for my favorite characters, all of which were things that I frankly haven't done for a Borderlands story since 2012. All in all, the story of Borderlands 4 feels fresh, it feels immersive, it feels high stakes, and it feels very engaging. Above all of that though, it feels familiar. It still has that signature Borderlands twang to it, and this time around they managed to keep that twang without letting it overpower the story. Now, in terms of probably the more popular aspect of Borderlands 4, the gameplay. Ironically, I felt a very similar feeling when playing this game for the first time that I felt when I first played Borderlands 3. What I mean by that is, Borderlands 4 was, in my opinion, a significant improvement from its previous title in terms of gameplay, just like how I felt Borderlands 3 was a significant gameplay improvement from Borderlands 2. And this doesn't at all mean that Borderlands 2 had bad gameplay, it just means Borderlands 3 took it to the next level, and just like that, Borderlands 4 has once again taken things to a whole new level with amazing gunplay, extraordinarily smooth movement, and a beautiful open world that actually feels alive and busy and engaging. I'm gonna be entirely honest, I had actually fallen off the bandwagon after Borderlands 3's release, and I wasn't keeping up with the franchise much at all, so I somehow was not aware at all that Borderlands 4 was a true open world game until I literally got in game and found out firsthand. All throughout this past year of seeing teasers for the game, I had assumed it was like the previous titles, big maps sectioned off by loading screens and separated levels. So to have been slapped in the face with the open world of Kairos, I was shocked, but also instantly concerned about how well they would execute a true open world experience in the Borderlands universe. Suffice to say, they executed it very well. As far as open worlds go, it obviously isn't as detailed or engaged as something like RDR2 or Elden Ring, but Borderlands isn't really a franchise that needs to rely on extraordinarily detailed world exploration to get their point across, and yet they did give their open world quite a bit of detail and sparkle. There are vast expanses of land on Kairos, with currently 3 distinct explorable regions of the planet. The Fade Fields are a beautiful, lush expanse of greenery and forests and rivers and plains with a very medieval vibe to it at times. Carcadia Burn is a return to form, with vast expanses of rocks and desert, and the region is flooded with bandits and rusting buildings, and it feels much like Pandora at times. Then finally, my favorite region, the Terminus Range, is a huge expanse of massive mountains and frozen snowy land, and scattered about the mountain ranges are cozy villages with cyberpunk vibes. It's so fucking cool. Each of the 3 regions of Kairos are absolutely massive, and yet they never feel empty to explore. I felt like literally anytime I drove anywhere for a quest, I'd first have to pass by at least 1 active world event, 3 potential side quests, explorable caves with tough bosses at the end of them, and hidden vault key fragments everywhere. I mean, for the love of God, this was the first time in Borderlands franchise where you are actively given the choice to, of your own volition, pursue and hunt down vault key fragments within the world of Kairos, living up to the whole Vault Hunter title to the fullest extent. Sure, you also hunted vaults in Borderlands 3 and the other titles, but just like the other titles, those ones were kinda just handed to you in the main campaign, and they certainly didn't have the raid-style gameplay that vaults in Borderlands 4 have. My point is, the open world of Borderlands 4 on Kairos was executed very well within this franchise. It's a beautiful world, it's a huge map, and there's quite a lot to do no matter where you explore. But I guess even a really nice open world doesn't mean much if the characters you're playing aren't fun, right? Well, boom! If there's one thing Borderlands games have never failed on, it's their playable vault hunters and their skill trees, and as you might imagine, Borderlands 4 did not fail their new set of vault hunters at all. Speaking from the perspective of Vex, who I put 50 hours into in my first playthrough, these new skill trees are somehow even more complex and customizable than even Borderlands 3, whose skill trees were already a massive step up from Borderlands 2. Each of the Vault Hunters' 3 skill tree paths contain distinctly and wildly different action skills as well as different playstyles, which allows you to turn your chosen character toward whatever playstyle feels the most satisfying for you. Generally speaking, each Vault Hunter still falls within a particular archetype, just like previous Borderlands games, like how Vex is mostly a damage-heavy summoner, Amon is a brawly, in-your-face brute, Rafa is a versatile weapon master, and Harlow is a tech-savvy gadget queen. Each of these is true of these these characters, but it's also a huge oversimplification of each of them. They all have intensely customizable skill trees that change up their entire playstyle depending on what fascinates you the most, and that, to me, simply adds even more replayability to the game than there already was. I'm a huge fan of the augment points within the skill trees because they can totally rewrite the way your character's action skill interacts, which adds a really fun level of exploration to your character as you respect your skills and invest in different parts of different trees, just kind of experimenting with how everything changes depending on what you invest in. All of that is to say, in terms of abilities and Vault Hunters, Borderlands 4 once again manages to top its predecessor. You won't be bored by the characters you play in this game. Also, within the realm of your playable character, I wanted to briefly mention how amazing the movement feels in Borderlands 4. They somehow managed to elevate and improve upon even Borderlands 3's movement, and it was already great. The addition of the rocket belt thing, or whatever it's called, allows you to do mid-air dashes and double jumps and air gliding, and it all feels so fluid both in combat and while out mindlessly exploring the super vertical parts of Kairos. It's a pretty simple addition to the movement of the game, but yet it adds so much. I could not praise it enough. Same with those grapple hooks. One of the final things I want to look at in terms of gameplay is obviously gunplay. Guns have always been the biggest marketing move of Borderlands, like how Borderlands 2 claimed they had a bazillion guns in their game before it came out. Then the game did come out, and it turned out that that was not just a marketing move. They really did have a bazillion guns in their game. Borderlands is nothing without its gunplay, and I'm happy to report that Borderlands 4 doesn't miss the mark with its guns. There is an incomprehensibly large pool of guns to discover and grab in this game, and the vast majority of them feel extremely satisfying to shoot, and of course there are some very wacky and weird guns that do a lot of weird and wacky things. It's a Borderlands game, that is to be expected. One of my favorite things about equipment in Borderlands 4 is the changes they've made to ordinances, or grenades. Grenades are no longer a resource per se, but are now sort of an extra ability with a cooldown timer, and when you pick up ordnance mods, you essentially give yourself a totally different grenade. There are normal-ish grenades still, of course. Some ordinances just have you chuck a regular old grenade that explodes after a few seconds, and that's fine. However, there are now some ordinances that make you punch an elemental ball at your enemies. There are some that make you toss out bouncing acid sprayers, and my personal favorite, there are now Jacob's brand ordinances that turn your grenades into throwing knives. And the throwing knives feel so good to use. When you hit a headshot with them, they deal significant damage. They just feel so good to use. All in all, grenades have been kind of overhauled in Borderlands 4 and have surprisingly turned into a staple aspect of the gameplay for lots of the available builds in the game. It's really fun. I will say I'm not a huge fan of the rep kits. I think they're kind of annoying to use, what with everything else you have to keep track of in terms of abilities and ordinances and cooldowns, but that's just my lazy opinion, and I'm aware there are a lot of people out there who will quite enjoy this extra mechanic. In terms of guns themselves, I don't think Borderlands 4 does anything particularly crazy in comparison to Borderlands 3. Both games have great gunplay, and that's kind of just that. There haven't been any huge changes to the gun systems themselves other than the addition of very distinct gun augments based on which company's parts are attached to the gun, and to be fair, that's a pretty fun addition, but in comparison to the other aspects of the game that they've heavily improved on, the gunplay hasn't changed too terribly much, but that's, One last minor thing I wanted to bring up is the in-game content. A lot of the more committed Borderlands players, myself included, really enjoy having in-game content to sink time into, and in general, it makes it feel a lot more rewarding to spend so much time investing in the game and all it has to offer, because then you have a final goal to look forward to where you really put your skills to the test. To put this blunt, Borderlands 4 does not currently have sufficient in-game content. In fairness, the game literally just came out, but for a game with such a dedicated in-game fan base, I think it was a pretty big oversight to not prepare solid in-game content on release. Then again, I don't work at Gearbox, so what would I know about their process and their plans? I'm just observing how bored I am now that my fully kitted Vex has to wait until the next major content update to put her powers to use. Now then, to sum up this entire video, I wanted to dedicate a final section where I go over everything and give a more objective, critical opinion of the game as a whole. Now that we've dissected my own personal experiences, as well as each moving part of the game itself, we can look at it in its entirety and answer the really important question: is Borderlands 4 really that good? I would argue, yeah, it is. Borderlands 4 came out at a really low point for the franchise. I mean, it's been 6 years since Borderlands 3, and objectively speaking, Borderlands 3 released with a lot of conflicting reviews and opinions for many reasons. So it could be argued that Borderlands 4 just feels so good to play because the bar was frankly pretty low. But I think the argument goes beyond that. Borderlands 4 feels feels like more than just a decent game during a low point in the franchise. Borderlands 4 feels like a pretty strong entry into the main series, one that builds upon its established lore very well, one that introduces exciting new characters while also breathing new life into old and recurring characters, one that embraces a whole new era with the open world of Kairos and does so with its own story, not with a nostalgia machine relying on our love of old stories and old gimmicks. At the end of Borderlands 4's campaign, I found myself asking two questions very equally. I asked myself, what's next? And I asked myself, which Vault Hunter do I play now? I feel like those two questions sum up the way this game went. It prepares you for the next installment of the franchise because of its exciting and ambitious story, but it also gives you a warm home to call your own with Kairos, a planet that I feel pretty confident I'll enjoy for the next few years because of the game's strong replayability, great customization, smooth gameplay, and engaging immersive character interactions. Borderlands 4, although not necessarily currently comparable to Borderlands 2 as the king of the franchise, is quite obviously the strongest game in the franchise since Borderlands 2, and does a lot of things very, very well. Maybe in time, people will start seriously comparing it to Borderlands 2. I mean, I wouldn't really be surprised. We'll just have to see what Gearbox has in store for the game this next 365 days, and what kind of content they have planned to further enhance the good baseline game they've already created. I'm saying in-game content. Put some fucking in-game content in. Anyway, if you made it this far in the video, you might as well just subscribe. I'm gonna keep making more videos just like this one, and you sat through this one, so what's gonna stop you from sitting through the next one? If you want to sit through another one, of course.